Hi, everybody. My name is Terry Bearden, and I am Project Director for Organizational Capacity Building here at the National Community Action Partnership. Welcome to the Leveraging Internal Feedback for Organizational Excellence webinar. We are pleased that you could join us, and we are going to be recording this session and making the recording and the slides available after our meeting time is finished today. So please feel free to put any questions in the chat or raise your hand if you would like to be recognized to come off mute. We want to make this as engaging an opportunity as possible. So with that, let's get started. We always like to ground ourselves in the promise of community action. Community action changes people's lives, embodies the spirit of hope, improves communities, and makes America a better place to live. We care about the entire community, and we are dedicated to helping people help themselves and each other. We really want to encourage you to lean into that promise as you go through your vital work with our communities. Next slide. All right, so what are we going to talk about today? We want to talk about what is excellence in community action. And we're going to talk about, so if we're going to work towards being excellent agencies, then we want to know who are our customers, who is being impacted by the work that we do. We're going to talk about what are some of the feedback mechanisms and considerations in your feedback processes that you'll want to consider. We're going to take a look at how we embed that feedback in our performance systems, talk about analyzing and acting on that feedback, and then building really that feedback culture into our organizations. And of course, because Mary Beth and I love to do this, we will provide you with resources. And I was remiss, I'm so sorry. Mary Beth, please introduce yourself. I'm so sorry.
No, don't be sorry. Hi, everyone. Mary Beth Schneeber-Remrev. I'm the Director of Organizational Capacity Building here at NCAP. So great to be with all of you this afternoon. I'd also love to know who's with us. If you want to say hello in the chat, tell us who you are and where you're joining from. It's always good to get a sense of where folks are. So thanks.
Sorry about that, Mary Beth. I guess I just assume we're one big happy family and everybody knows who everybody is. So again, Mary Beth and I will make sure that you get some useful resources to use as well. Next slide. All right, so when we think about excellence, we fully believe that communities need and deserve excellent community action agencies, but that also that every agency can and should continuously strive to increase efficiency, right? Because that means we're doing the right thing in the right way. Effectiveness, that means we're doing the right things. And to go beyond just meeting those basic expectations, but to really move towards being excellent organizations as our communities deserve. Next slide. So how do we get there? So we have a set of 35 best-in-class practices that have been put together by community action agencies. They're based on the Malcolm Baldrige criteria for performance excellence, but because community action is really its own little world and we work differently than many organizations, those standards of excellence, the Baldrige criteria, have been tailored to really fit the way our organizations operate, the language that we utilize, our mission. And so we take a look at those standards of excellence every 2 years to make sure that they are still relevant and still meeting the needs of the next network and still talking about what does excellence mean in community action. On the next slide, let's take a look at what those standards of excellence are. We have 7 categories, and you'll see some commonalities in terms of ways that we think about how our agencies operate, right? So we always think about organizational leadership. We think about and are required to have strategic plans, which then guide the direction that our agencies move in and the strategies we deploy. We have our customer, constituent, and partner focus, of course. Those are all of our customers, or our main customer buckets, let's call them. And of course, performance management, how we measure and analyze our impact, our people focus, our human resource focus, our organizational process management, how we do the things that we do, and of course, always a focus on organizational results as well. Next slide. So again, Mary Beth and I are big believers that excellence is not possible without actually creating that culture of continuous quality improvement, right? We want to continuously be assessing how we are performing and how we can utilize the feedback that we receive to make improvements in our processes, in our policies, and our procedures, in the way that we deliver services and the way that we interact with our communities as a whole. So we are firm believers that excellence is not possible without really developing that culture of continuous quality improvement. And you'll notice that there's a plan, do, study, act cycle that is depicted here. And this is a very common way of implementing a continuous quality improvement cycle. And then that can help to ingrain the culture of continuous quality improvement in your organizations. Slide. So excellence is also not possible without a focus on our customers, right? Our customers are our very reason for being. And so we don't want to think about excellence for excellence sake. We want always to think about excellence in service to our customers, excellence in service to our mission. And so I am going to turn things over to Mary Beth and let her, oh, no, not yet. Not yet. I'm trying to jump the gun here. I'm sorry. So let's take a look at our customers. So when we think about how our customers defined by the standards of excellence, really we're looking at two different groups of customers. We have our external customers, right? So typically those are people with low incomes, our partners, our stakeholders, our investors, and our funding sources, and the community as a whole. And in terms of internal customers, that's our staff, our board members, and our volunteers. But there are two very different types of insight that we can develop by interacting with our customers, by asking for their feedback, by asking for their opinions, and by really listening and heeding to the feedback that we get. So when we think about our external customers, this is where we can really gain some insight into our service quality, right? The impacts that the services and programs that we operate are having on the community, and then where are there unmet needs that we are not addressing yet. When we think about our internal customers, that's where we're going to gain insight into how we actually operate. What are our strengths? What are some challenges that we are facing internally? And so we want to make sure that we are engaging with both of these groups of customers, and they are defined within the standards of excellence. And so taking a look at that at the standards can really help you to develop those processes to engage. And so some of the internal customers that we have, they have this unique perspective and insight, right? And so their perspectives are really going to have a measurable impact on like retention, but also some of those less measurable things like employee morale, right? So when there are things that we want to gain insight into, like morale, we want to make sure that we're engaging with our internal customers in ways that provide them with the opportunity to give us that qualitative data, right? Retention can be a more quantitative, but when we think about our internal customers, we want to think, how can they provide us with information on morale? How is what we're doing, our engagement with them, the overall organizational culture, how might that be affecting our retention? So if we take a look at all of these segments of perspective, we can put all of the feedback that we get from our internal customers together and really have a better understanding of how our agencies are operating and kind of what the takeaway is for our staff. So what do we need to learn from our internal customers? I'd like to ask you guys to just drop a couple of words or a line in the chat and tell us what you think we need to know from our internal customers. Do our processes work? Hi, Erin. Yeah, so that's one of the things that we can learn, right? We're doing A, B, and C. Are those the right things? Mary Beth, internal customer. Yes, thank you for the reminder. So when we talk about internal customers, staff, board, and volunteers, do they feel like they belong to the team, right? That sense of belonging. Thank you, Kathy. What else? Anything else? What else do we need to know from our customers? Anything you want to add, Mary Beth?
Yeah, Terry, while folks are getting some thoughts together on the prior slide, we had talked about that um, your teams, your staff have an idea about the way things actually function. And, I think that kind of goes to Erin's point about like, do our processes work, right? Like we create all of these beautiful policies that work in theory, but when you actually put them into practice, what's actually happening? Where are the barriers? The other thing is that a lot of times our internal customers have a knowledge of our community that maybe don't show up in data yet. A lot of times the data sets that we use for like community assessment, they're lagging, right? It takes a couple of years to get that data. So your frontline staff probably have better insight into what's going on in your community than a lot of the data sets that you can get in the quantitative space. So just wanted to add that in there. I see there's a few other thoughts.
So what are our strengths and weaknesses within our agency, right? That's an important thing that we want to be measuring constantly. Jan, how can we help them to succeed, right? Our staff, how can we help our staff to succeed? And do they have the support that they need? Clarissa added as well. Yeah, so really good insight here. I want to encourage you to really think about all three of those different stakeholder groups. I think that sometimes we don't necessarily interact with our volunteers in these really meaningful, robust ways. So make sure that we're heeding that. And then now I think, Mary Beth, I'm actually going to turn things over to you.
Thanks, Terry. Thanks, Terry. And so, we've identified some things that we might want to know from our internal customers. And you have to know what you want first, and then you can think about what's the best method for me to receive that feedback or to gather that input or feedback from those internal customers. And there are a number of ways that you can gather that feedback, and these should look pretty familiar to all of us in community action. Obviously, you can do surveys, things like employee engagement surveys, employee satisfaction surveys. You can also use like standardized assessment tools like, a board assessment, or I'm going to show you an assessment tool we have at the partnership to help you understand how things are actually functioning from a staff perspective. But you don't always just need quantitative data. Sometimes you need qualitative data because, quantitative data often tells you what is happening, but it doesn't tell you why. And the qualitative data will help you to understand why you're seeing what you're seeing in the quantitative data. And so meetings and interviews can be a really good way to also gather feedback and can be a little more informal, allows for the two-way communication that you might need to really leverage some good feedback. Focus groups, you can have staff focus groups, maybe have focus groups around certain functions in your organization or processes to gather good feedback. And kind of the same thing with advisory groups. Advisory groups tend to be a little more, focus groups tend to be ad hoc as needed when we have a particular thing we're trying to get an insight on, whereas advisory groups tend to be a formal structure that we have within our organization to provide ongoing guidance to the organization about any variety of things. So one of the spaces we've seen advisory groups really frequently in community action agencies and in nonprofits and lots of organizations at this point is like employee engagement, right? There might be an advisory group in that space, or you might have an advisory group related to data and data use. So advisory groups are another thing you can find in your or you can use to gather feedback. And, you do have to think about what kind of feedback am I looking to receive, and then align your method to, what you're trying to receive and your customer group accordingly. So we did kind of already talk about employee satisfaction, but just want to reiterate that it is really important to know and understand your employee satisfaction rates and employee engagement. There's lots and lots of research that says that when employees feel engaged, they report a higher level of well-being overall. Organizations have a better retention rate, there's lower absenteeism, and there's higher productivity reported. In those organizations. And as mission-driven organizations, we obviously care about the well-being of our staff, and we also care about the outcomes that are achieved, uh, for our customers. And so, good, staff who feel well and cared for are more likely to help our customers feel well and cared for. And so, if you're not tracking employee satisfaction, employee engagement over time, this might be a really good place to start in your organization. A lot of folks, when they come to trying to do like an employee satisfaction survey, or employee satisfaction, they use a survey. That's a pretty standard tool that you can use over time, and then it allows you to measure the same data points over time so you can look at trends. So customer surveys in general, there are some do's and don'ts. There is a science to how you approach creating a survey, and we just wanted to share a few do's and don'ts with you. And honestly, these do's and don'ts apply to your community assessment. They apply to a customer satisfaction survey for external customers and for your internal customers. And one of the first things to do when you're developing a customer survey or an employee satisfaction survey is to start with the end in mind. What is the data? What is the information that you need to gather? And that should really drive the questions that go into your survey. If you look at your survey at the end and you identify a question that you go, I don't know how we would use that data, that's a question that you would probably want to remove, because that brings us to the next point. Keep your surveys short, succinct. If you've ever opened a survey and saw that there were like 50 questions and closed it out, right? We've all been there. But when you open the survey and it's like, here are 10 questions, it's going to take you 5 minutes. People are more willing to complete that, and you really want the data, right? So keep them short. Use those different tools for different customer segments. How you survey your staff is probably different than you need to survey your board or your volunteers. So create those custom tools accordingly. And do also consider how you might ask questions that would allow you on the back end to segment the data. This goes back to starting with the end in mind. If you're thinking about engagement in your organization, are there some groups in your organization who are more likely to be engaged? Maybe it's determined by location or their function within the organization or the department that they serve in. So if you ask some good questions about who they are, who the people are who are responding on the back end, then you can look at the data by those segments to see if there are differences amongst those segments. Because then you can also figure out, are there some conditions that make folks more likely to say that they feel satisfied at work, or that they feel like they're engaged in their work. So think about those questions that will allow you to segment the data on the back end. Obviously, review these things over time, amend them as needed, and always, always, always consider your timing. Obviously, if there was just a major change in your organization, your customer satisfaction or your employee satisfaction surveys might be lower than they were last year, right? So do think about the timing of your surveys. When it comes to a couple of the don'ts, things not to do, don't ask double-barreled or leading questions. If a question has an and in it, I tend to slow down and just look at it. That's not a surefire rule, but a lot of times, if you have an and, do you feel satisfied and fulfilled in your work? Well, that's, a double-barreled questions. You want to ask one discrete topic at a time, and don't try to lead people to where you want them to be, right? Don't assume that anybody feels a certain way about their work. How fulfilling is your work? Well, maybe some folks don't find it fulfilling. So yeah, just be mindful of that. Don't use the jargon. We all know that. We also recommend that you not ask demographic questions first. Demographic questions and like those questions that would allow you to do some segmenting. If you put those on the back end, folks are more likely to one, complete the survey, and two, provide you that data. When you open a survey and you see demographic questions right up front, I do this all the time myself, it feels a little personal. It feels a little invasive sometimes. And you go, gosh, I don't want to answer all that. And so then you move on to something else. But at the point that, if you put demographic questions at the end, I already have some sunk costs into this survey. I'm less likely to abandon the survey, and I would still have the front end data. I would still have all the data about, if somebody was satisfied at work, um, available to me. But if I had the demographic questions up front, folks got uncomfortable and they left, I would have no data. So put those demographic questions or those questions that might allow you to segment your data at the end. Don't do things like change the scale, right? 0 to 5, where 5 is good and 0 is bad. Don't flip that halfway through the survey. And just, keep it really simple. This doesn't have to be rocket science. You can keep your processes really simple, and that's more likely to garner you a good result. So in addition to like doing a survey, like where you're trying to understand people's just satisfaction, another really good practice that we see in organizations is the use of a board assessment. And we know that excellent boards and excellent agencies take time to step back and reflect on how they are performing in areas such as, their governance or their recruitment or their leadership. How, do board members feel like they're fulfilling the mission? And so you can do a regular board assessment to help you gather this data from your board members. Board members, might not in a regular meeting be raising their hands and saying, hey, I don't know if I feel like we're fulfilling our mission. But when you ask some really specific questions about to what degree do you feel like the organization is fulfilling its mission? Or, hey, do you feel like you understand our financial statements? Or how do you think we're doing overall with our goals around our strategic plan? You can use lots and lots of different tools. There are some that are pre-made, and we're putting some links to those in the chat. Um, you can use these tools. There's some great tools out there for totally free. You could also build your own. Nothing wrong with that. You could look at some of these and just, take what you like and leave the rest. And as I said, you can use that assessment to not just gather feedback on how do boards think they're performing, but also what are their training needs, right? What else do they need from the organization to fulfill their governance responsibilities? And just overall, how satisfied are they with their board service? So board assessment is an excellence practice. In excellent community action agencies, we see a board assessment is done every year with the board over time. Yes, we do have hyperlinks for those board assessments, and we'll be putting them in the chat in just 1 second. And while we're getting that up, I am also going to start to talk to you a little bit about our organizational assessment tool. So the organizational assessment tool was designed for use by community action agencies. It is based on the standards of excellence. And what it does is it gathers the perceptions of deployment of agency strategy. So it's not like assessing you against anything other than how staff think or see that these core practices are actually taking place within the organization. This tool, if I didn't already say it, is free, and it is incorporated into the same platform where we have our free risk assessment portal. So you can use that same platform. And I'm going to show you that platform in just a second. And then ultimately at the end, what we hope you can do is gather some good information from your staff about, where they see that the organization is doing really well, and some areas where they see that maybe the best in class practice isn't being fully deployed. And then you can use that to inform your improvement efforts, right? So I am actually going to do like the very risky thing where I try to show you what this looks like live. Folks who have ever done training with me will tell you that there is a scientific method for making sure that technology works, right? Can anyone put it in the chat for what you have to do to make sure technology works when you need it? Anybody know? Friends, you have to hold your breath. So, oh, be in a rush. Yeah, sure. If you're in a rush, then yeah, great. But also, generally speaking, I find if everyone holds their breath all together, we will get it to work. So, okay, there we are. I hope that folks are actually seeing the portal. Here we are. Oh, that is not working, but okay, Terry will put a link in the chat for me because that part is not working, but the portal itself is working. So when you come into the portal, the thing that you're looking for is the organizational assessment tool. And this is what it will look like for your staff, as they will say, continue. Only administrators see this other thing. Everyone else only sees the organizational assessment. And then it does spin for a minute. That is totally normal. Nothing is broken. Um, and when this loads, it'll give you some good information about what this tool is and how it works. Folks tell us, who their agency, are you doing this as part of Pathways to Excellence? And then tell us who they are. This again allows you to segment your data on the back end to understand if different positions report different levels of agreement with the statements. And then these categories each align with the best-in-class practices in Pathways to Excellence and the standards of excellence. And there's just really simple statements here. And folks have to, assess to what level they agree with that statement. So our senior top leaders communicate our organization's values to guide us. Well, if you agree, you agree, right? This is all pretty straightforward. There is a spot for comments as well. As folks update each section, they do have to hit update each section, and then they scroll on down and go to the next section. And as I said, these are all related to the standards of excellence. And so once folks have completed the survey, administrators can see on the back end their aggregate results. And so I will show you what those look like. On the back end then, by category, you will see where folks scored your agency on each one of those criteria. And then at the bottom, you'll get a total aggregate score. So you'll know how you're doing out of all of the possible points. How many points did you score? How many people responded? And then any comments that were received. And you can use this data to look for, are there areas where we're really not performing well, right? Are there areas where we're doing really well to help you inform where you might want to spend some time on improvement efforts? Setting this up is really simple. Folks who are administrators can easily add folks to take the survey by coming here to my account and adding members. Very, very straightforward. You don't need a lot of information to add members here either. The big thing is that when you use this tool, just to make sure you tell your staff that you're using it for the organizational assessment, to use that first button that we saw when you came in and not the risk assessment. Also, just to clarify, the organizational assessment is not an organizational risk assessment. If you're trying to do an agency-wide risk assessment, you're using the risk assessment section, okay? So this is a great tool. We've heard lots of great feedback about the tool and the kinds of things that agencies have been able to do with the data that they got out of this. It also helped them with kind of assessing if some of their improvement efforts were being successful, because it took almost nothing, 6 months down the line just to reissue this survey. And then they could compare their results over time to see how it was being received across the organization. So super cool tool that you can use in your organization. So I am now going to go back to our regularly scheduled programming. So bear with me one moment. If y'all have thoughts or questions or reactions, would love to see those in the chat. While I'm just going to click through, when you get the PowerPoint slides, all the things I just showed you are here in screenshot for you about how you can view your results and use your team results. And then at the end, you can have those recommendations. So I talked a little bit about how you can collect data from your internal customers to use for improvement. So Terry, I'm going to pass back to you to talk about how you can use this to make a system of feedback.
Right. Thank you, Mary Beth. And always appreciate the comments that are put in there, especially by certain people. I'm not going to call anybody specific out, but his initials are Aaron Wicks. So thank you very much. Always a pleasure. So like Mary Beth said, right, we want to do more than just launch these surveys. We want to build these into a structure. We want to be systematic. We want to have processes that are replicable so that we can utilize the data that we collect for decision making and for performance improvement and for communications and all of those great things. If you're collecting the feedback, but then you're not really building it into your systems in any way, you're not building into those reviews or those decisions or those plans, then you're really just spinning your wheels. It's a wasted effort. So we want to make sure that you recognize that this is about being systemic. This is about repeating these processes. And Mary Beth mentioned that, you know, we're hearing from a lot of agencies what their takeaways are from some of these processes. And so it is through that repeating of the use of these surveys or evaluations or various ways of interacting with our stakeholder groups that we can gather data that we can utilize over time and we can analyze over time to make sure that what we are doing is having the intended impact. And that, of course, allows us for some course corrections when we don't see the results that we want. So we want to make sure that we're gathering quantitative data, that we're utilizing some opportunities for interpersonal relationships to gather the qualitative data, but that we're building this into processes that we replicate over time so that we can, again, analyze that data and build stronger organizations. Next slide. So how do you analyze feedback? I am not the person you want to have analyzing your data, but there are some things that you don't have to be you know, that data analyst in order to do. And even I can count, right? I can do some basic comparisons and examine those the data over time. You know, are we improving? Are we not improving? Are we maintaining? And then also analyze themes, right? What are we seeing? What are some of the commonalities that we see across our data? And how do we utilize all of that information to really inform the decisions that we are making along the way? So you don't have to have gotten better than a B in statistics and statistical analysis. Those are my 2 Bs in college to be able to do these things. All right, so then it's really about how do we utilize the data? How do we compile the data? And looking at data in different ways can really help you to develop additional meaning, right? So if you look at the column on the left, these are Pew Research data sets here. So we can see that overall job satisfaction here was about 51%. And then when we start looking at the details of the job, those satisfaction rates vary considerably, right? On the right-hand side, we are compiling the data and analyzing the data in a different way. We are categorizing the data based on age group. And so we are going to be able to tell a different story with our data that we have gathered. So it's really about how you look at your data. You want to make sure that you are analyzing and compiling and utilizing your data to tell the story in relation to the questions that you ask, right? So you want to make sure that these things are in alignment and that you also don't get stuck at looking at your own data in the same way. Pull it apart, put it back together, think about your various stakeholder groups and the questions that you are trying to answer with your data, and make sure that the way that you put your data together is in alignment with the questions that you're trying to answer. So then you have to make meaning of it, right? We've gotten the data, that's the numbers, we're analyzing it. So now we want to think about who's going to make meaning of this data and who's going to decide what to do. So the way that we what we're going to do and who is going to utilize our data, that can really influence the way that we approach our data analysis and how we put the information together for the people who are going to be utilizing it to make decisions. So we want to really create a system where we have our quantitative data. We analyze that quantitative data to create the questions. We collect some qualitative data to really inform our quantitative data, and analyze and find the key takeaways from our data. And then when we present a final report to board or leadership for action, we want to make sure that we have, congealed the data into a format that is meaningful, can be understood, and that action can then be taken as a basis of reading our analysis and our report to leadership. Next slide. Okay, so now we're getting kind of into my iffy areas. We're going to start using words that I may have to ask Mary Beth to tell me again. We want to really kind of drill down, right? So one of the ways that we can do that is by identifying root causes. So root causes, who's heard of the 5 whys? Oh, Mary Beth is in the chat, and I'm sorry, I have not looked at that. She may have given me all my answers. So the 5 whys, right? You have an issue, you ask why, and then you take that answer and you ask why, and you do that 5 times. And by the time you do that 5 times, you have probably removed a lot of assumptions, and you have really drilled down to what is the cause of this particular issue or condition of poverty, those things. Use a fishbone diagram, and Mary Beth has created or presented a very nice little depiction of this, and you can just see how you start with a problem and you drill down. Again, the point is to really, oh no, wait, I'm sorry. Fishbone diagram, you're going the other way. Help me out, Mary Beth.
Yeah, you take your problem and you essentially have that
Go
on the
this way.
end, and then you say, okay, what are the like drivers of that problem, right? What are some of the conditions that are creating that problem? And then you put those at the top. You see like those other boxes at the top and the bottom. And then like you drill into, so what are the specific things driving that? So it enables you to see lots of the different factors that are all contributing to the problem. Because a lot of times the problems that we're dealing with, or the problem we're trying to solve for, it's not a magic solution. They're multifaceted. So it enables you to kind of uncover some of those other drivers behind a problem.
And so, Mary Beth, before you, or just nod your head, it
Yeah.
is Pareto analysis?
I've heard it Pareto. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, then I
Yeah.
won't feel too badly for mangling a name if other people mangle it as well. So that is the other example that we have here. So that is a decision-making tool based on the idea that 80% of a project's benefit can be achieved by doing 20% of the work, or the opposite, right? That 80% of problems can be traced to 20% of the causes. So again, I do not take my information today and run with it, but definitely look these up. And there are some tools that you can utilize to really drill down into your data and help to make meaning of those numbers and help our decision makers in their processes. So
Terry,
with that, yes,
I'm a
please.
geek about Pareto analysis,
I
so
know,
I'll
you're
just
so
say
good at
that
it.
right now, that like the Pareto analysis, that principle of 80% of your problems are attributable to 20% of your causes. My organization used Pareto analysis for all kinds of things. It comes from manufacturing, but the principle we found it to stand true. So when you look at like what is driving employee turnover, if you start like coding those things and putting them onto a chart like this, then when you are thinking about where am I going to spend my time, if I'm trying to impact my turnover rate, I'm trying to decrease it significantly in the next 3 to 5 months, then I might be I want to look at those things that are the biggest driver, right? What is the most common
Right.
reason that people are citing that they are leaving or staying, right? So that you can then focus in on that driver to make the most out of your very limited time and money resources. And that principle can apply to all kinds of things within your organization, not just employee satisfaction, but anytime that you're having something that you know, you have a problem that you're trying to solve for, essentially. Even, why are people not achieving their outcomes? Why are people in their programs not achieving outcomes, right? You could also do a Pareto analysis there if you have the data, right? To know, like, why are people reporting that they're not fulfilling their goal plan or whatever it is. And when you chart it out, you're going to see it in a totally different way and be able to have some new conversations. So, okay, I'm going
And
to go back and not repeat.
then if you measure that again over time, then you'll be able to make that apples to apples comparison. Awesome. Awesome. So I think, Mary Beth, I'm going to turn back over to you
Yeah.
to talk about actually taking action.
Yeah, so, you spend all of this time gathering information from folks. You're asking them for their time and treasure and their insights, and that is really valuable. And then you have to take action, to honor the gift that people gave you of their insight. It is our responsibility to take action based on what we learned. And um, whenever you're getting ready to take action, it is really important to be clear on what is the problem that we're trying to solve, right? Let's be in agreement on that. And then when we understand what's driving the problem, which hopefully we've gathered from our internal feedback, then you can begin to work on solutions. So one of the first things that you can do is to co-design your solution with whoever your customer group is. This could be, again, agency customers, external customers, or even your internal customers. So if you're trying to solve for high turnover rates, we'll go to the employee advisory council that you have. Um, Let's talk about, what could we do to affect this together? Folks who are closest to the problem or the opportunity are often closest to the solution. They have insight, so leverage them to co-design what a solution can look like. Even still, even when you're co-designing with your customers, it can be very beneficial to look at what are best practices. What does, the research tell us about conditions or actions that we can take to drive this problem or solution that we're trying to work towards. So, do a quick scan of what are other organizations doing? What are other organizations doing that's working to retain employees, to increase engagement, to whatever that may be. And if you're not sure about where to find those best practices, Google is great. ChatGPT, AI can be great as well. But also making that space to connect with your peers, asking, your state association, hey, is there anyone who's cracked this? Coming to NCAP, asking us for examples. We're always happy to connect you with your peers. And then the other thing is that you don't have to take a solution and just put it out to everybody and run with it, right? Like full scale change is actually it's very risky. If you're an organization of 400 people and you're going to change, the way that you you know, your HR software, you know what? You might want to actually prototype and pilot that first or come onto that in phases so that you can do some learning and verify that the solution you're working on is actually going to work before you roll it out to your whole organization. So, don't be shy about prototyping and piloting a potential solution before you put it out to the whole organization. The other thing that I think we sometimes get stuck on in the taking action is we want everything to be perfect. And we go, gosh, if it's not 100 if we don't have the 100% solution, then we shouldn't be putting it out there. We shouldn't be doing that. And another 80% principle, an 80% solution is a whole heck of a lot better than zero. And so if you can run with the 80% solution, recognize you're going to do some learning, there's going to be some bumps. That's okay. We're going to learn from it and we're going to improve. That's the fastest way to actually get to improvement, is to get started with improving. And so then when it comes to your managing of the performance, make sure then that, whatever the action is that you're taking to make improvements in your organization, um, be clear about what is it that we're doing, who owns those actions, who is responsible for getting them done. You could do a RACI matrix here, right? Who's responsible, accountable, who's consulted and informed, right? A RACI matrix is a great tool that you can use here. Also, what are the deadlines? What are the benchmarks for when things have to be done? And what are the metrics that we're going to use to know if we're making improvement? So just to say we want, this is Roma 101. It's not just, hey, we want to decrease turnover. By how much do you want to decrease turnover? What's realistic? What's realistic in the time frame that you have? Be very clear about your goal and the actions you're going to take to move you towards that goal. And then here we go again with embedding the agency performance, embedding this into your agency performance management systems. Friends, you have lots of performance management systems that already exist in your organization. You don't have to set up a special, team. You don't have to set up a special review necessarily. Like, if you have a few things that you're working on, that you're working to improve, could you just embed it into your regular quarterly review of progress? You're probably doing a quarterly review of agency, budget to actual, or agency, annual report outcomes, target to actual. So like, just do it there, right? Build it right into however it is that you're already managing your performance. Where are we with that improvement effort? You can always use tools like dashboards. Visual tools are very helpful for us to all see how we're doing. Also, if there's folks who are, maybe you're working on some, employee engagement or employee satisfaction, maybe there's some build into your supervisor employee coaching plans. Also, if your board is working on any improvements, you could build it into like a board work plan, right? What is it that the board is going to do in the next year to to address those issues that they discovered through their own board assessment? Here's the other thing is you have to be sure that you close the loop. If folks give us data and they give us their input and then we never report back on what we did with that data and it looks like we did nothing, then we're saying that data was not valued and not important. And it can really undermine any effort that you have to get honest feedback from your staff or volunteers or board. So close the loop, share the results. Here's what we found, and here's what we're doing. Sometimes you're going to also not be taking action, right? Sometimes the results are going to be what they're going to be, and for whatever reason, you're not going to be able to take action. If you're not taking action, make sure that you at least provide some kind of explanation for, this is not a priority right now. We're prioritizing here. We don't have the resources for this, just so folks don't think, okay, nobody cares about that, right? Because that is really, that can be really demoralizing for staff and anyone who gave you input. Always say thank you to the folks who did the hard work. And again, invite that ongoing feedback. As you make improvements, there will be new opportunities to improve too. And so opening the door for us to continue the conversation about how we're doing will go a long way. And that really brings us to the last point that we have here. Now is a great time if you have questions, reflections, to be putting those into the chat or the Q&A. Terry and I are working from both, but this really comes into building a culture of listening and action and not just doing the one-off staff evaluation survey or the one-off board assessment that we did one time 5 years ago, right? Build those systematic approaches so that, no matter who sits in the seats that you're in, next year, whether or not you're in that seat, we know that in June, we do the employee satisfaction survey. And every September, we do the employee or the board assessment. And the Employee Advisory Council receives the employee satisfaction survey in August, and then they build a work plan that goes into effect in January. Whatever your system is going to be, build it out, right? Who's going to collect the data? Who's going to use the data? When is that going to be implemented? And like, what's your time frames? Who's responsible? Always model that open communication. I think we've talked enough about that. Create those spaces where you can co-create. Advisory councils, again, go a long way. You're not having to pull together a quick team every time that you have a problem. You can rely on some ongoing feedback. Always celebrate constructive input. Our colleague here at NCAP, Jennifer Gregory, always says feedback is a gift. And even when feedback is really hard, it is still a gift, right? And so let's honor that and celebrate that constructive feedback even when it's tough. And just making listening a part of the job. That goes for all levels of our organization, leaders, staff, board. Part of our job is to listen to feedback and make improvements. And then we really just have to embed the practice into the way that we do business so that it's not just the one-off. We do an employee satisfaction survey, but we care about the satisfaction of our customers 100%. And therefore, we are always assessing how customers feel about the operations of the agency, internal, external, so on and so forth. So Terry, with that brings us to Pathways to Excellence, which is really about embedding those practices into your agency culture at its core.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about how do we know these things work? One of the ways that we know these things work is by interacting with agencies that enroll in the Pathways to Excellence program. They deploy many of the practices that we have talked about and are provided with opportunities to really learn and grow in their practice of excellence. So let's take a look at what that means for agencies. So the excellence journey, this cycle may look familiar, but and really it's because our agencies, to work best, they need to be systematic. And so we're talking about cycles in so many ways, and the excellence journey is another way, another type of cycle. So we like to encourage agencies to enroll and really learn about the standards of excellence. You learn about your how do we assess the approach and deployment and the results that agencies achieve. Agencies plan to improve their performance, implement their plans to improve, and evaluate the results, right? So again, it's this continuous loop of moving towards excellence that agencies engage in. For the Pathways to Excellence program, this looks like learning about those standards of excellence. At the silver and above tiers, there is a self-study process that really helps agencies to assess and document their commitments to excellence. There's the opportunity through the self-study process to have your self-study analyzed by community action peer experts and hear how you may improve your implementation of excellence and those opportunities to celebrate what you're doing very well. And of course, agencies move to implement and really institutionalize the standards of excellence that are the measurable portion of being an agency of excellence. And ideally, we'd like to see agencies receive that recognition as Community Action Agency of Excellence. I'm getting a little short on time. This is a quick overview of what each of the tiers look like in the Pathways to Excellence program. And you'll see as you look that there are, of course, increased requirements as you move through the tiers, but they do build on each other, right? So we see agencies moving through the tiers in good time and really learning a lot and being able to make some meaningful improvements in the way that they operate on a day-to-day basis. And so I encourage you to take a look at this. We don't require that agencies start at any particular tier. You can start where you believe that your agency is best poised to be successful. And so Mary Beth and I are always willing to answer any questions, jump on a call with you if you have any questions about the Pathways to Excellence program. All right, so here's how you can get started. We've provided you with a link to the standards of excellence. Take a look at them. Think about your organization. Enroll in Pathways to Excellence. We accept bronze enrollments throughout the year. Silver and gold fall cohort enrollment deadline is July 18th, and then that cohort will meet throughout the fall months. You can participate in Excellence Implementer Training. We'll be offering that again in 2025. Really helps folks to understand kind of what it would take to help lead a team through a self-study process. And also, we're always looking for talented peer reviewers, and we'll be providing that opportunity in fall of 2025 as well. Please join us in Detroit. We want to mention, of course, we'll have a great conference, a convention itself. We also have a couple of pre-cons that I want to mention to you, the new Executive Directors Institute. If any of you are executive directors at your agencies that have been there 5 years or so or less, we are providing an opportunity for you to get together for a day, and then there'll be additional opportunity to engage after our conference. And the data convening. We are going to have our second ever data convening, and it is also a pre-convention activity. So we'll be there the Monday afternoon and Tuesday before the full convention kicks off. So please use that QR code, get some more information, and join us in Detroit. It's going to be a great, great convention. Is that everything, Mary Beth? Was there any questions in the chat that I did not see?
I don't see any questions. I don't see any comments. Aaron talked about
Aaron,
his agency's engagement in Pathways to Excellence, which is always great to hear. But I don't see anything else. Do folks have other comments, questions, reflections? And if you raise your hand, we can unmute you. We do have that ability.
yes, we can.
If
Absolutely.
you're like, oh, typing is like too much today, which heard, seen, felt. Yes.
Yeah, it's a real thing.
It's a real thing. We are really looking forward to Detroit. If you are a data wonk, join us for the data convening. We're very, very excited for that. And the whole conference is just going to be a great opportunity to connect with each other.
Hey, even
And
if you're just data curious.
yeah, yeah.
The data curious.
That's right. We'll take the data curious too. And at annual, you'll also see us celebrating some of the agencies who have achieved their excellence tiers. So we're looking forward to those celebrations with the network there as well. And all of those new CCAPs. Ooh, we're very excited to celebrate those new CCAPs in Detroit. So with that, I think we're going to say thank you. Thank you for your time.
Okay, guys. Thank
Thank
you
you for
all.
your attention, your participation, and we'll see you soon. Take care, y'all.